CNN, BBC, France 24. These are not just news organizations, they are symbols of a carefully crafted global narrative. For decades, they've painted Africa as a continent of chaos, disease, and despair. But what happens when one voice rises, not to plead, not to explain, but to confront, challenge, and expose? I am recording every lie, declares Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the young leader of Burkina Faso. His words cut through the static like a blade, shattering the image Western media has sold the world. This isn't just a speech. It's a reckoning. For years, Africa's story has been told by those who do not live it. By cameras that only turn on when there's blood. By pens that only write when there's failure. By headlines that only shout when it's about aid, war, or corruption. But today, the script is changing. This video unveils a powerful truth the media doesn't want you to hear. A truth buried under centuries of colonialism, wrapped in humanitarian aid, masked by peacekeeping, and whispered through economic deals that leave African countries poorer than before. This is the story of how a continent rich in resources became a victim of invisible chains. Of how global powers profit while millions suffer. Of how a new generation is rising to reclaim its narrative, with smartphones, not rifles, with knowledge, not dependency. Prepare to see the truth behind the lens. This is Africa, unfiltered, unedited, unapologetic. And the voice you're about to hear might just be the most important voice of our time. Africa. In the eyes of Western media, it's a place of despair, forever struggling, always in need, perpetually chaotic. The imagery is predictable: malnourished children, dusty villages, rebels in the bush, gunfire in the background. If you've watched a news segment about Africa, chances are, you've seen this script before. It's a visual stereotype that has been recycled for generations. Captain Ibrahim Traoré doesn't just question this portrayal, he dismantles it. In his address, he calls out the media's obsession with the dark side of Africa and its silence on the continent's progress. Have you ever made Africa's successes your headlines? He asks. The answer, tragically, is no. Where are the front-page stories about Rwanda's transformation into a tech hub? About Ethiopia's historic reforestation efforts, where millions of trees were planted in a single day? About Botswana's democratic stability? Or Kenya's booming startup ecosystem? These stories exist. But they're not convenient. They don't fit the narrative. Instead, major outlets like the New York Times, The Guardian, or France 24 continue to broadcast a version of Africa frozen in tragedy, because that version justifies foreign intervention. It justifies aid packages, peacekeeping troops, and economic partnerships that often do more harm than good. This distortion isn't accidental. Traoré suggests it's strategic. A hopeful, thriving Africa threatens the foundation of global inequality. If Africa isn't seen as helpless, then why send aid? If Africa isn't seen as unstable, then why deploy troops? If Africa is capable, then who really needs saving? Even worse, this narrative takes a psychological toll on Africans themselves, especially the youth. Traoré speaks of growing up ashamed of his homeland, believing the lies broadcast on foreign screens. It wasn't until he questioned everything that he saw through the fog. His awakening is now shared by millions. Thanks to the rise of social media, young Africans are reclaiming their image. TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, these platforms have become spaces where real African stories are told by real African voices. But even these are now being censored, flagged as misinformation, or dismissed as Russian propaganda. The media monopoly is fighting back, but it's losing. The media's Africa is not the real Africa. It's a narrative designed for foreign consumption, not local truth. And every time it is repeated, it reinforces a lie that keeps the continent in chains. Africa is rich, staggeringly so. It holds the majority of the world's most coveted resources: cobalt, gold, diamonds, uranium, oil, rare earth metals. Yet, across this vast continent, poverty persists with cruel irony. The disconnect is jarring, and Ibrahim Traoré forces us to confront the truth behind it. Let's talk numbers. Cobalt, the heart of every smartphone, laptop, and electric vehicle battery, is mostly found in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Africa holds 70% of global cobalt reserves. Yet, Congolese miners, many of them children, work in dangerous, hand-dug pits for less than $2 a day. Most have never owned a cell phone. Platinum fuels the global tech and medical industry. Africa owns 90% of the world's platinum, concentrated in South Africa. Yet, the country faces mass unemployment and power outages, while foreign companies extract billions. Gold flows out of Mali, Burkina Faso, Ghana, and Tanzania. 30% of the world's gold comes from Africa. But local populations see little more than polluted rivers and shuttered schools. Diamonds sparkle on red carpets and in wedding rings across the world. Africa provides 65% of global diamond output. In countries like Sierra Leone and Angola, miners live in slums, and civil wars once fueled by diamonds still haunt the land. Uranium, which powers Europe's nuclear plants, comes from Niger and Namibia. Paris is lit by African uranium, yet many Nigerian homes remain in darkness. These aren't isolated cases. This is a pattern. A system. The problem isn't that Africa lacks wealth. The problem is that its wealth is being siphoned off by a global structure designed to extract, not uplift. Corporations from the global north sign lopsided contracts, pay negligible taxes, and leave behind environmental and social wreckage. In 2022, Glencore, a Swiss-based mining giant, earned $256 billion. It paid the Congo just $500 million in taxes. That's 0.2%. Rio Tinto extracts 20 million tons of bauxite annually from Guinea. The return? Cancer, contaminated soil, and toxic sludge. French energy giant Total made $36 billion in profits, while pipelines in Angola and Nigeria leak into farmlands. And this is just the visible part. The invisible theft is even worse: transfer pricing, tax evasion, illicit financial flows, and offshore accounts drain $88 billion annually from Africa. Meanwhile, the world praises itself for donating $45 billion in aid. Traore makes it painfully clear: Africa isn't being helped. It's being looted. The story of Africa's poverty is, in fact, the story of others' prosperity. Your smartphone, your electric car, your jewelry, your tech lifestyle, it's all subsidized by African labor and sacrifice. And this is why the lie must be maintained. A prosperous, empowered Africa would disrupt the global economic order. So, the media portrays it as needy. The banks impose crushing debt. The corporations keep extracting. And Africa stays poor, on paper. But not in reality. The reality is, Africa is not poor. It is being robbed. Colonialism didn't die, it evolved. The flags came down, but the hands stayed in the soil. What was once done with rifles and redcoats is now done with contracts and consultants. And according to Ibrahim Traoré, this transformation is not progress, it's just better marketing for the same theft. The new colonialism wears a suit and signs documents. It walks into parliaments, not jungles. It offers loans instead of bullets, builds pipelines instead of prisons, and smiles while it takes. But make no mistake, the end result is the same. Africa is still not free, not economically, not politically, not militarily. Traore breaks the system down step by step. Create corruption, foreign companies bribe African officials, offer scholarships to their children, and set up offshore accounts. Luxury for the few becomes misery for the many. Secure long-term concessions, 50-year or even 99-year deals are signed. These contracts allow foreign firms to exploit oil, gold, and minerals with barely any tax obligations and zero environmental responsibility. Control infrastructure, railways, ports, and airports are designed only to serve extraction, not development. Roads from mine to port are built. Roads from mine to school or hospital are not. Provide security, private military contractors arrive, funded by the same companies doing the extraction. Locals who protest are silenced. Sometimes literally. The state protects corporations, not its citizens. Silence the media, journalists who investigate are discredited, fired, or worse. Foreign-funded outlets control the narrative, presenting these operations as investment or development aid. And here's the twisted irony, these companies often pay less than 1% in taxes. In return, they extract billions. Local communities get pollution, displacement, and empty promises. This model doesn't just keep Africa poor, it makes it actively poorer. For every dollar that comes in as aid, $2 leave as stolen wealth. And the West has the audacity to call this charity? France still controls the currency of 14 African nations through the CFA franc. Half of these countries' foreign reserves sit in the French treasury, earning negative interest. France profits while Africa pays to use its own money. This is not development. This is entrapment. And Traoré's message is clear, we see the system now. The masks have fallen. The contracts are not binding when they are built on exploitation. The next generation is not signing up for another century of polite colonization. Colonialism didn't end. It simply got better at hiding. In today's world, perception is power. And those who control the narrative shape the future. According to Ibrahim Traoré, the greatest weapon used against Africa isn't guns or sanctions, it's stories. Specifically, the ones told by a media machine funded, filtered, and fine-tuned to protect Western interests. Traoré doesn't just blame journalists. He goes deeper, into the machinery behind the headlines. Who owns the media? Billionaires. Who advertises in major outlets like CNN, BBC, or the New York Times? Oil companies, arms manufacturers, mining giants, pharmaceutical conglomerates, the very entities extracting value from Africa. Who shapes editorial direction? Ivy League graduates, think tank experts, NGO consultants, all from the same elite circles, educated in the same worldview. This is not journalism. This is public relations for empire. Traoré calls out a long list of actors, Rupert Murdoch, Jeff Bezos, Carlos Slim. All media moguls. All deeply invested, financially or ideologically, in maintaining the status quo. Even independent outlets are often funded by government-linked entities or foundations like the Ford Foundation, the Open Society Foundations, or the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And what do they get in return? Access. Influence. Control over what counts as truth. Then come the fact-checkers. Africa Check. AFP Fact Check. Their job? Not to investigate corruption or expose exploitation, but to discredit African voices calling out colonial continuity. When someone says France extracts $500 billion a year from Africa, the response isn't denial, it's deflection. Actually, it's $440 billion. As if that makes it acceptable. And what about celebrity humanitarians? Bono raises billions through benefit concerts, but shifts profits through tax havens. Angelina Jolie adopts a child from Malawi, while malaria kills 100 children a day there. These are not solutions. They are distractions. They reinforce the myth of the white savior while ignoring systemic theft. And still, these stories are the ones that get told. Not the stories of African inventors, teachers, reformers, or revolutionaries. Not the truth about stolen wealth, rigged trade deals, or military interventions. Just one long PR campaign to keep the global North comfortable and the global South silent. But the silence is breaking. African voices are rising, not through traditional media, but through blogs, podcasts, and social networks. They don't need editors. They don't need approval. They just need connection. And now they have it. What do you call a leader who plants 10 million trees, vaccinates millions of children, promotes gender equality, and defies the International Monetary Fund? In the eyes of Western powers, a threat. In the hearts of Africans, a hero. And in the case of Thomas Sankara, Burkina Faso's visionary president, it meant death. Ibrahim Traoré doesn't just recall history, he reclaims it. He names the names: Patrice Lumumba, assassinated with the help of the CIA and Belgian mercenaries. His body dissolved in acid, his teeth kept as trophies. He names Muammar Gaddafi, lynched after launching a bold plan to unite Africa under one gold-backed currency. He names Thomas Sankara, gunned down in a coup backed by his closest ally and allegedly orchestrated with France's support. Their crime? Challenging the system. Sankara rejected Western aid, denouncing it as a tool of dependency. He banned luxury cars for officials and pushed for food self-sufficiency. He empowered women, banned female genital mutilation, and increased literacy from 13% to 73%, all in just 4 years. His reward? Death at age 37. The media labeled it a military coup. They didn't speak of his reforms. They didn't mourn his dreams. Just another dictator gone, they said. As if he were no different from the tyrants he fought against. Gaddafi, too, was far from perfect. But under his rule, Libya had the highest per capita income in Africa. Free healthcare, free education, housing support, and a massive desert irrigation project. His sin wasn't oppression, it was independence. His true threat was the dream of a United States of Africa, economically sovereign, militarily self-reliant, and politically united. And Lumumba? The democratically elected Prime Minister of Congo, murdered within months of taking office. Why? Because he refused to let Belgium and the United States divide and plunder his country. Traoré reminds us that these assassinations weren't random acts of violence. They were strategic. They were coordinated. They were part of a long-standing playbook: kill the visionary, install the puppet, continue the extraction. But something has changed. These names are no longer whispered in fear, they are shouted in pride. Murals, songs, hashtags, documentaries, they live on. Their ideas outlived the bullets. And Traoré's message is clear: we remember. Africa's new generation does not forget. It builds upon the legacy of those who dared to dream. Why are foreign soldiers stationed across Africa? Why do anti-terror operations continue for decades with worsening results? Ibrahim Traoré's answer is unsettling but brutally clear: terrorism has become the perfect excuse for permanent foreign presence and resource control. Let's look at the facts. In 2013, there were approximately 500 active terrorists in Mali. By 2022, after years of French military involvement through Operation Barkhane, the number skyrocketed to over 5,000. That's a tenfold increase. So what exactly was accomplished with billions of euros and thousands of troops? According to Traore, chaos. But not by accident, by design. Foreign troops were strategically deployed near uranium mines in Niger, oil pipelines in Nigeria, and diamond routes in Burkina Faso. Meanwhile, terrorists roamed freely, burning villages and killing civilians, often just kilometers away from military bases. Why weren't they stopped? Because chaos justifies presence. And presence ensures control. United Nations missions haven't fared better. MINUSMA, the UN peacekeeping force in Mali, deployed 15,000 troops with an annual budget of $1.2 billion. After 10 years, the result? Rising violence, 300+ UN soldiers dead, thousands of civilians lost, and no end in sight. And now, when African nations turn to alternative allies, like Russia's Wagner Group, the Western media panics. Russian mercenaries, they cry. Threat to democracy. But what happened when Wagner arrived in Mali? Villages once terrorized became safe. Mines restarted. Order returned. The key difference, Traore emphasizes, is consent. Wagner was invited. France was not. One acts on agreement. The other on entitlement. Even the origins of terrorism in Africa are tied to foreign interference. Al-Qaeda? Born in the Cold War, trained by the CIA, ISIS? Emerged after the US dismantled Iraq's military and governance. Boko Haram? Radicalized by state brutality, armed through looted Libyan weapons after Gaddafi's fall, another Western intervention. Every crisis seems to trace back to a liberation effort. Every wave of violence, conveniently, benefits mining companies, oil firms, and weapons manufacturers. And still, Western leaders claim moral high ground. They speak of stability, while financing instability. They warn of authoritarianism, while supporting brutal regimes. As long as the contracts are signed. But the mask is slipping. Traore insists, Africa will now handle its own security. Not through foreign drones or proxy forces, but through African armies defending African lives, for the first time, not as mercenaries, but as protectors. This is not just a speech. It's not even just a warning. It is, as Captain Ibrahim Traoré declares, a mirror, held up to the face of the world. A reflection of centuries of distortion, betrayal, and theft. And also, the image of something new, Africa awake. Africa unafraid. For too long, Africa's identity has been narrated by outsiders. Every crisis inflated. Every success ignored. Every leader who dared to defy the system, labeled a dictator, demonized, or eliminated. But this narrative has cracked. And through that fracture, a new voice rises. Africa is no longer begging. It is building. No longer ashamed. It is proud. No longer silent. It is loud. A digital army of youth, 600 million strong, 60% under the age of 25, is reclaiming the narrative. They speak on TikTok, Twitter, and Instagram. They don't wait for permission. They don't ask for approval. They write their own history. And the old world? It's panicking. Why else would hashtags like #BarFranceOut trend with over 100 million uses? Why else would fact-checkers scramble to discredit African voices? Why else would media giants dismiss genuine outrage as foreign propaganda? Because control is slipping. Africa is no longer your story. It's its own author, with its own voice, its own camera, and its own language. The heroes are no longer charity workers with cameras or celebrities with foundations. The heroes are teachers in Lagos, coders in Nairobi, farmers in Ouagadougou, rebels of the system like Sankara, Lumumba, Gaddafi, and yes, Traore. This story doesn't end with a plea. It ends with a promise. A promise that Africa will rise, not with borrowed ideas, but with its own vision. Not under foreign flags, but with sovereign dignity. Not in silence, but with truth loud enough to shake palaces and boardrooms alike.